I think Golden State has so many weapons that I think Steve Kerr is overrated. I think the best coach, and I'm not saying this to be controversial, but the guy that put the work in and laid the foundation was Mark Jackson. And I'm not knocking Steve Kerr. He's done a tremendous job, took him to the next level. But I've seen Luke Walton win there. I've seen Mike Brown now win there. I've seen Mark Jackson win with an immature team, and Kerr gets the benefit of a very mature team. I think they'll be fine with Mike Brown.
I'm not saying you're wrong. Let me throw this out there. There's a guy in the NFL that reminds me of Mike Brown. We love him. He has some success. Been fired a couple times. He's known as a defensive specialist. And in the end, we see him as a 2, not a 1. And his name is Wade Phillips.
I knew that.
Wade Phillips and Mike Brown.
Awesome comparison.
You cannot find anybody to criticize him. We acknowledge elite defensive coaches, but there is something in their personality. Maybe they're likable. Maybe they don't have a certain resolve. They don't confront. They're passive-aggressive. They don't work as a 1 over time.
They can't go 12-0 in the playoffs either.
well, that's the thing. Like, I don't. First of all, I do think Mike Brown's underrated. He was NBA Coach of the Year. He's coached in the finals. And that 1 year and 5 games in L.A., he took them further than Phil Jackson had taken them the year before.
Right.
He won 1 extra playoff game, okay? But they both went out in the second round. So I think he's a little underrated, but I think he's fine with this because it's the Warriors. You might be right, but this team is so stacked that he just doesn't have to get in the way.
I'm a product of Mike Brown, so I'm pom-poms, jumping flips for Mike Brown. That's my guy. I wouldn't have got my opportunity in San Antonio without Mike Brown. Mike is a defensive coach. I think he's great for Golden State right now. They don't have one problem on offense. They can score with anybody in the world. But it's going to be times in those finals that you're going to have to make defensive adjustments. Mike Brown has got so many adjustments and learned so much from coaching under Pop. And those playoffs and making adjustments, Pop is the best at making adjustments. Mike Brown has that in him. He's from that school of Greg Popovich. If any coach can sit on that bench and get these guys ready to win the championship, I got all the confidence in the world in Mike Brown.
It is interesting, though. We have seen this happen. Barry Switzer takes over for Jimmy Johnson, and there's an inertia, and it works for about a year. And like Oregon, Chip Kelly leaves, the next guy comes in, and it works for about a year. I think you could make the argument for a couple months it works. But again, I go back to this. I could run Microsoft for 2 months, 2 years, and that thing's a toy store. I think over time, Kerr does add something.
I'm not saying that. Yeah, I'm not saying that, but I'm going to defend Mike Brown in this regard. I'm not saying I believe this, but if he were here and could be honest, he'd be like, hey, man, I had to coach, it was a pleasure, coaching Kobe and LeBron. That's 2 hard jobs.
Yes.
Those guys are hard to coach and hard to manage. And then he gets dumped after a year in Cleveland the second time around. His failures, to me, are somewhat justifiable and excusable. Listen, I just think Golden State has so many pieces. To me, it's like Hugh Hefner throwing a party. It's always going to be a great party because you got everybody on staff. Everybody's on staff. He's coaching.
Nice.
He's got the Playboy Mansion. To coach, anybody can throw a great party at the Playboy Mansion.
Well, what's going to be interesting in your point, there's no guarantee Steve Kerr will be back, period, to coach this team.
That's right.
So let's say they win the championship and Steve Kerr can't return. Do they stick with Mike Brown? That'll be the test of your theory. I think they would if they won the championship.
You got to remember, this is the guy that Steve picked. Steve knew what situation he was going to be in. Steve knew he wasn't going to be able to show up at all the games because of his back situation. So he picked Mike Brown. So if anybody has confidence in Mike Brown, the head coach of the team does.
Don't knock. We're not asking you to knock Mike Brown. But what is a legitimate criticism of him?
That he's not the in-your-face guy. That he's just not that. He talks proper. You know, he's not what you expect from a black coach. You know, he's not the in-your-face, curse you out type of guy. You know, he's a student of the game. You know, like I say, he comes from Greg Popovich. So nobody on that sideline is the in-your-face, curse you out type of coach. None of them. They're all smart, intelligent coaches.
But he carries the baggage because he's black and people expect
him
something.
to be that. But when he gets his next head coaching job, that's my guy. He's bringing me on as a coach when he gets his next coaching job, so I'll handle all of the nonsense.
Look, he's coached LeBron, Kobe, and now Kevin Durant and Steph Curry.
By the way,
that's
blessings right there. You know what you find about Mike Brown? A lot of players like him, but Kobe and LeBron didn't because
Right.
Kobe and LeBron are demanding. And they don't want to have to do all the yelling and screaming. So maybe Kobe and LeBron, they want to pop. They don't want to have to do that.
Right.
So other players.
LeBron don't want to coach.
Here's the thing with LeBron, though, because
LeBron want to coach,
obviously
be the
does
GM
not
president. He wanna-
they obviously had tension in Mike's first stint there. But when they rehired Mike Brown in Cleveland, don't think they didn't get the blessing
From
of
LeBron.
LeBron, Rich
Right.
Paul, LeBron. Not that Rich said,
Yep.
we're coming back, but they checked with him. Look, would Mike Brown be a deterrent to LeBron coming back? They said no.